to Tension Discussions episode. I don't know how many.
7.
7. Today on the show we have a special guest. I met this woman through a workshop that I heard about from a friend, and I just thought it was introduced to me at a very right time in my life, and I was prepared mentally for it. And the workshop was about empowering women or connecting with your power. Anyways, I will let her introduce the subject herself. So please welcome to the show, Mistress Malissia. Hello.
Hi. Welcome to Tension Discussions.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, tell us about what you do and how you started that.
Okay, yes. So I started working as a professional dominatrix for a few years, and eventually I got really inspired to work more with women because in my field of work I was very surrounded with the masculine, with men, and although I felt like I was doing a lot of meaningful work, helping them be more humble and conscious as men and access their innate desires, express them. I also thought that I wanted to elevate women as well. And I kept receiving questions and women asking me for advice, asking me if I do mentoring. And that was already maybe I was just 3 years in working as a pro dom, and I kept thinking, well, eventually I could also maybe teach women, but I didn't feel ready, or I thought I was still kind of beginning myself. But because the demand kept rising, at some point during the pandemic is when I moved to more online domination work, and that I got inspired to do something else, which is why I created the program, the Divine Dom Awakening.
Mm.
And that program was inspired by the idea that I wanted to lead women on a journey to have access to their innate power and to be able to use the skills that DOMs use in sessions and with their clients, but for everyday life with their partners, co-workers, just speaking up their truth, asking for what they want, knowing how to know what they want. Because I realized so many women, I would ask them, okay, what do you want? And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm more focused on what my partner wants. So for me, it was kind of a big gap between how women give versus receive, whether it's pleasure or just their needs met, their desires met, being connected to their desire. And I created this 8-week program that was going to be in person in Montreal. And I wanted to do a test run because I had the whole concept. I knew exactly what I wanted to do each week. It was a journey. It was a lot of hard, deep work requiring these women to be really ready for almost like a boot camp experience.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's all or nothing. I can't just do surface and just talk about certain things. I needed to go deep. So I even included shadow work and breath work. So that was for me a trial, and that's the program in which we met.
Yeah.
And it was just to see how people respond, get feedback, get a sense of what I can improve, and also start this new journey myself of being a mentor for women and not just being a professional dominatrix. But I come from the point of being a professional dominatrix, not a coach. I didn't do years of coaching, so I'm a mistress first, and that's the knowledge I start with. But I also use a lot of spirituality and psychology. I've studied in psychology. I've been myself on a spiritual journey for a few years now, and I include that in my sessions, but I also included it in my program because I think it's very important just as personal development. And as the program was finishing, I kept receiving more and more demands to do it online because a lot of people are not in Montreal, and I wanted to transfer it online so I can have an impact on a broader audience and that people can join. In between, I started doing also workshops, like 4-hour workshops here and there, just kind of for me trying to see what it is that I can provide as content and to create a structure of teaching, because I had never done that before. But the demand, or like the people writing to me, is what inspired me to do it, because I felt like that was lacking. And especially from a perspective that is holistic and not so much of like, okay, let's beat men up, I'll teach you like how to just do domination work. And my second round online was more focused on female domination, and yet including as much like personal development, but the demand was so much on like, I want to be a dom. And for me, unless you already have like some sort of self-confidence, it's going to be really hard for me to teach you how to do impact play, how to tie someone, how to verbally abuse someone, how to play in different ways if you don't yourself even trust yourself and you don't even have any self-esteem. And so for me, to be a pro dom it's great. Some people naturally can do it, and others need to kind of work on themselves first to already gain that confidence, and then they will be naturally doms because they already are dominant and they have their natural dominant power. And then the skills you can learn anywhere, like the connection is more important than the actual use of like this tool or that tool, or how to wrap someone in plastic and things like that. So for me, it's more like, how does that woman feel when she is in that scene with that person, the connection, the dominant submissive power exchange dynamic. So she has to already be able to speak up, so it's not the sub that is kind of like, am I really like handled properly? Like, can I trust her? Does she really have control? And that happens a lot. I see a lot of new aspiring doms, and they do these sessions and they feel like the sub controls everything. And I'm like, yeah, but that's because maybe you don't know how to take that leadership. So you need to start already working at the root of that confidence, and then it will be really easy to be a professional dom if you want to get in that industry of sex work. Yeah.
You said a lot of things. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I want to get back to shadow work. I was curious about that. But so what you were doing came out of a need that arose from people kept asking you. So you were kind of like thrust into that position, or is this something like you ended up knowing that you wanted to do?
No, I think I was put in that position, and I needed to come to a place to really embrace it and see myself as a mentor, because most mentors, especially in that field, have 20 years experience as pro doms. So for me, until I get there, I never even thought that I could teach. And because I kept getting these questions and people wanting to learn from me, I had to also adapt it. And from the feedback I got, because I'm younger, so my approach is more modern and adapted to, like, I guess, the current vagues of like the kind of like, we're not going to get the same clients ultimately, me and older women. Like, there is also clients for everyone's, but like the people I will attract will be because I am younger and because my approach is more maybe like connected to what I exude. And I guess that's what these women were interested in, more than just learning classical domination. Yeah.
Well, the workshop that I did with you, like for me, the draw was not about dominating men or dominating, really. It was more about connecting with the self, discovering our desires. How did you like go from dominatrix to this, like, it's very spiritual, I think. And my other experiences, like yoga teacher training, I came across a lot of the same notions. They're framed differently, but at the core, it's really like the same thing. like listen to yourself, tune in, learn to say no. What do you want? And it's not really like about, it's not about dominating anyone. It's just being like you.
And assertive. Yeah, for me, already BDSM is about bringing the unconscious to the conscious. So there is a connection with the spiritual if you want to see it that way. Because as you said earlier, there's a lot of shadow work. So much of our desires are kept in the shadow. Like there's so much shame, stigma, misconceptions that make people scared to talk about it, experience it, being judged. Like there's so many layers of like just accepting the side of yourself, that the moment you feel safe and you trust someone to open up, it's almost like you exhibit this repressed part of yourself, which is a form of shadow work ultimately. And we play also in a more metaphorical way in the shadow. Like the dungeons are always like hidden, it's dark, we don't see it outside, we don't talk about it. It's like we know it exists, but it's kind of like kept in the shadows. And that's what also, because of the society we live in, and now kinksters are treated the same way people from the LGBTQ community used to be treated. It's like, I know that you're this thing, but I don't want to see it or hear about it, do it in private. So it's the same with now people who are kinky and want to explore BDSM. So they go into the shadow of themselves. The moment they enter the dungeon, they're kind of but they're kind of in the mindset of like, okay, I'm coming here to strip from my identity, from my clothes, from everything, like, and I can be vulnerable.
This is the only place where I can take off my mask.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't even know what's behind the mask. And for that, you need sometimes to put a mask on to explore it, like a hood or something. Yeah. It's like, oh, I can be anyone right now because I'm not myself anymore. So it's like an exploration of your identity and of your like truth ultimately.
I struggled with that most of my life, actually, and went through like kind of a midlife crisis where I was like, I can't live in that shadow anymore. So did a lot of counseling to kind of break free of that, and eventually found kink and community, and then created this space where we're trying to like do what we can to move Shibari out of the shadows, while at the same time counseling people that it is something that is in the shadows, and so to treat that appropriately, but that it's okay to be kind of in the light with what you do.
That's exactly it. You bring to the light what's been kept in the dark. Yeah.
An observation that I had like since we did the workshop is, so you teach women, and I've been encountering many men. Okay, so you have this notion of good girl conditioning. Yes.
Yes. So the good girl conditioning is a concept that came from Kasia Urbaniak, who was my mentor. So she writes about how women are conditioned to be good girl, but they're also stuck in a double bind, that it's like you don't want to be too much or not enough. And like I see it also as a patriarchal imprint that affects everyone, not just women, but that you kind of absorb these unconscious societal expectations of what you should or shouldn't do, want or not want, be or not be.
And ever since I encountered this concept, I keep noticing it every single day. But interestingly enough, not just in women, I know a lot of men who also, say yes to things they don't want, afraid to speak up, afraid to express themselves. I don't know if there's
many people who struggle with gender identity as well, who are more in the femme spectrum, struggle with that notion, I think.
Sure, but I'm not even speaking about, like, yes, it's true.
But like you call me a good girl all the time.
Yes, I do. You can blame her for that.
Well, that brings also, like, if you call someone a good girl in like a sexual context, it can be exciting because you kind of reclaim it and you use it, like you choose to be that. But sometimes it can also be like a way to kind of pour light onto, wait, is that behavior really yours, or are you like,
are you just saying yes to me because you think that's what I want, or because that's truly yes for you?
Like people pleasing is a very common response of like wanting to be accepted. And I just had a call with a client recently, and she was telling me about how she has a hard time asking for what she wants, and then she realized she doesn't really know what she wants, and then we started digging deeper, and it comes from a sense of like, am I even worth it? Am I even enough? And these like questions are so like deeply ingrained that when I do this work through this program, for instance, we go to that root, because if you have an underlying belief that you are not enough, how are you going to have a session when you're like, I want this and this way, and bring it to me on your knees and like asking for everything and not being like, oh, could you do this please? Like, I don't want to disturb. So there's this whole thing of like owning what you want. And for that, you need to know you deserve it. And there's like so many layers to just be assertive that come from what's underneath your lack of assertiveness. It's not just me teaching you how to be assertive and to raise your voice. It's like, what is actually keeping your voice shut? What is the limiting belief behind it?
I feel like I want to come back and do some more. How do you find it's expressed? Like, because you keep bringing it back to the dungeon and that context, but we're talking about real life context where, like, I connected very strongly with the things that we did in class, and like really not in the dungeon setting. And every day, finding the courage to ask for something that's scary and being prepared to hear no for an answer, and then being surprised with a yes. Those big asks, like, that left a big impression on me. And I read Kasia Urbaniak's book after you recommended it. Still don't know if there's a question in there. But how do you see your clients like grow and express themselves more, like in the real world setting?
Well, the same way you said, or that I observed and you shared with me actually, about how it impacted your relationships and just little small changes that you do this for yourself without always thinking, just as an example, thinking of like, oh, what if I do this, which is for me, and I would love that, but the other person takes it personal and they don't like it, or they feel rejected. And that ultimately you choose to put the other first, and you kind of like subtract your own needs, which is a very common thing because of the fear of being like rejected or judged or not being seen as good enough. So for me, it's more like I do a lot of parallels between the dungeon and reality, just because I feel like the dungeon is symbolically like how you act in your intimacy. So not even a dungeon, but like how you are in your intimacy with someone can translate directly into how you are outside. How you approach sexuality is how you approach life. Are you curious? Are you apprehensive? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Oh, new adventure, something new, or oh, this is something I don't know, out of my comfort zone. So the way you approach sexuality, the way you are in your intimacy has a direct impact on how you are in your outside life and how you deal with everyday situations. So if you are intimate with someone, whether it's in a DS context, in a BDSM context, in the dungeon, or just like in bed with your husband, and something is going on and you're like, I really don't like this, but if I tell them, they will maybe feel like they are not good, and I want to make sure they feel good because of their ego. So you don't say anything and ultimately just take it, which is what a lot of women would do. They just take it and oh, he's pleased, so I did my job well, I'm good. But you're not pleased yourself, and it's almost like you annihilate yourself from the situation. So that will then maybe translate at being at work and having someone ask of you to do extra work and stay later, and you have something planned, but you're like, okay, I can't really say no because they will think this or that from me, and maybe I won't be seen as someone who does a good job, and you don't speak up your needs, your truth. And so I think it translates directly.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, in an intimate context, it can be harder or easier. So if you feel like you are in trust with your partner and you can talk about everything, it will be really easy to practice with them. But if you are in a situation where you realize you have a hard time being vulnerable with your partner and to speak up about your desires, your needs, your fantasies, and you kind of are just like doing what you used to do and you're more in a habits routine thing, then it might be harder to get out of it, because then your partner might be like, wait, why are you acting weird? What is that? Like, they're not used to seeing you in this way. So it can be either easier or harder in intimacy, but ultimately practicing in that context gives you the confidence to then bring it outside.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think the concept of practice is really important here. I'll just speak for myself. Like, it started what you described, like, oh, can I say this? Oh, like, I feel kind of funny. Okay, I'll just say it.
Mm-hmm.
And then gauging the reaction, like, oh, that went better than expected. And every next time it goes better and better and better until there's less and less anxiety to say what you want or what you need, to ask for things, until there comes a moment where it's just like, this is easy.
Mm.
Well, what it comes down to is normalizing conversation and negotiation. Is like ultimately what it comes down to. It's talking about, like, so what do you associate this shadow work is, like expressing desire?
No, for me, shadow work is more the parts of yourself that you don't want to look at. The
Okay.
ugly, the dark, the disgusting, the parts that are for a reason repressed, because it can be associated with trauma, but it can also be parts of yourself that are amazing, but that if they're so amazing that when they come out, you will kind of be this light that will blind everyone, and then everyone will be like, oh, you're too much, or this is too much. So sometimes it holds a lot of treasures, what you kind of repress. If I come out and I just like sing and I have this voice, but then it will kind of make everyone feel like they're smaller. What would that create as an imbalance? How will they perceive me? So I should like stay small. So that can also be repressed the same way as something you really feel like is horrible. Maybe you were shamed for it or judged for it when you were a kid, and then you were like, okay, this is something that will make me not being accepted in the tribe, or like I belong, so I better like never bring this out again. Just like unconsciously. Most things are unconsciously repressed. Sometimes, yeah, but mostly it's unconscious, because when it comes out, that's when you're like, how do I respond to this? And is this really me? And you have to like approach it with curiosity and compassion, not with another judgmental voice of like, oh yeah, you are disgusting. This is really like perverted. And it's like, oh, it's perverted and it's great. You know, I want to see more. So with enthusiasm, even like looking at these parts.
Yeah, but that does require a certain like un entourage social that accepts that, right?
Or just someone you feel safe with.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Feeling safe.
Because like throughout that's what I kind of went through, is a lot of like reactions of disgust, which continuously made me repress those shadowy things that I no longer talked about. Then I had to completely change social circle to become accepted.
I think that's actually a very big aspect. I think when we do connect deeply with ourselves and we start to discover and express more who we are, our social circles will naturally change, because suddenly you realize the people in your life maybe no longer fit the reality of who you are.
And often they want to keep projecting onto you what you were, because if you change too much, it will make them question themselves of like, if I'm not changing, maybe I'm not growing. And sometimes they don't want to move or get out of their ways. So you are reflecting back onto them that they're kind of in the same place the more you grow.
In the same place, being stuck.
yeah, or just not necessarily working on themselves or growing, or they might not see it as suck. Maybe it's for them the perfect situation, and you're like, yeah, but I need more, and I want to be more, and I want to bloom. And for them, they're like, but why? You're fine as you are. And if you're not fine as you are, am I not fine as I am? So yeah.
So it's multi-part. It's like kind of exposing the shadows is acceptable and okay, and then normalizing the discussion around those shadows and how to communicate and how to.
So vulnerability, ultimately.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. And that's why I admire submission and submissives, because I think there's a lot of courage in putting yourself in that vulnerable position and exposing these parts of yourself. And a lot of misconceptions are around submission or submissives being weak, when ultimately it's so much easier to just remain in your ego and kind of hide away than to be raw and exposed and treated in a way that kind of opens you up completely. And you're like, yes, see me naked, but naked like beyond physical naked. So there's a lot of admiration I have for submissives.
It's interesting that you're saying that, because earlier when you were framing being a dominant, like exactly what you just said applies. It's being naked with your desires, with saying, do this the way I want it, and you have to be able to just like have that out there and not apologize. And I find that's a very vulnerable place to be, even more so than being on the receiving end of that, because then you respond. Oh, do I like this? Do I not like this?
And a word for our switchy people as well. It's okay to want both.
To be able to like do both.
Yeah, exactly.
To ask for what you want and to fulfill the needs of others.
I have a question, but it's a little bit like more of a Kasia Urbaniak book question, because she talks about being submissive, or like coming from a submissive place but in a powerful way. Can you speak to that?
Well, already when you choose submission, I don't exactly recall about that chapter, but in my perspective, when you choose to be submissive, there is choice. So there is so much power in choosing. And I think a lot of what patriarchy does is place women as in the role of submissive as a given. You will be submissive to men, whether that's like sexually or in the household or in the roles you play as parents. It's like he will guide and you will follow. And then it also translates into other parts where women will kind of stay silent because the man is talking or talk after. So that's like submission that is almost like not consensual. But when you choose to be in the sub position, when my subs come to my dungeon, I don't pick them up on the street like, okay, you come here, I'm going to make you my sub. No, they come willingly. They want that. So there's a lot of power in making the decision of I want to place myself in this position and receive whatever she wants to give me or take anything like that she wants to like inflict on me. So I think in general, there's so much power in choice and choosing that. And that's why also women, I teach women empowerment and dominance, but if a woman is like, yeah, but I get really turned on being submissive. And I'm like, that's perfect. That's great. And that holds so much power, because even if you're on the submissive end of the spectrum, you are choosing that. So you have a lot of power, and ultimately you can still like, you have as much power as the dominant in negotiating the scene and what you want and how you want it. And it takes a lot of, once again, vulnerability to be like, well, I really want you to spank me. I really want you to do these things to me. So it's once again asking for what you want. It's just this time it's you receiving something from the other, whether that is, I want to receive your cock, or I want to receive your a foot massage. It doesn't matter. It's still, I want to receive this because it gives me pleasure. So I think there's as much power in either.
And just a quick note, if we do have anybody who has questions, you can put it in the chat or through Instagram, and we'll be able to ask the questions. We get a list online.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do have somebody who joined us in the crowd, and so if we have any questions out there, do ask. Just lift your hand and we'll try to get that to you.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question about the book?
It doesn't really matter. I think like the book in itself is a very powerful tool, and I've been recommending it to my friends whom I observe falling into good girl behavior, or they like a lot of my friends often complain like, oh yeah, I just put up with this stuff, like, oh, my roommate does this and I don't say anything because it's easier to not deal with it. Like, read this book. Take care of yourself. Put yourself first. Things will line up.
Do we have that in the library?
No.
We should get it. And we'll put a link in the video description.
Sure, I have it at home.
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot of misconception to just the concepts of dominant and submissive. Like a lot of people don't really get the negotiation part. That as a submissive, you talk about you have as much power, sometimes even more power than the dominant, because you kind of get to choose the playing field, right?
Well, you have a responsibility to say what you like, dislike, prefer, not prefer, but I think that you also want, as the submissive, to be kind of open to allow the dom to do what they want in a way that you surrender to it, and not control of like, okay, I want this in this way, specific, and topping from the bottom, which can happen often. And sometimes it's not a bad thing, because I feel like a lot of people who come from a place of wanting to feel safe, they need to have control, but at the same time, they will never be really freed and transcend if they control the whole thing. They have to trust their dominant. And if you engage in this type of play, there has to be trust. And if there is trust, you trust your dominant, and your dominant represents the leader in that context. So when you want to submit to someone, it's like, I want to follow your lead because I trust that you're going to bring me to a place I want to go to. You don't just submit to someone you don't really know or care where they're going to bring you. You ultimately are like, okay, catch me, I'm going to fall, and you trust they're going to catch you. So you have to trust that the dominant will also lead you someplace you want to go. And the more you try to control, the more ultimately you're the person dominating. So it's good to communicate your needs, your wants, your limits, your boundaries, your preferences, your previous experiences and why they light you up, things like that. But to leave like a margin for the dom to be like, okay, thank you, I have like a good idea of like where you're at and where I want to bring you, and then trust me ultimately, and don't like sometimes like with clients it's different a little, like in a professional setting, because they come from not having anything like this in their everyday life, not having a partner with who they play, getting out of their context and their reality for a very short period of time where they completely disconnect from their identity and everyday life to experience these things. So to really let go and surrender and just trust can take more time, and they would sometimes just be like, oh, but wait, this way, not that way, because they're so used to controlling and being in that position. And you need to like build trust to get to that point. And it can't happen with once when you meet someone. Just like when you meet a therapist the first time, you're not going to just like open up completely and be like, this is everything. It will take time to open up. Anything intimate is like that. It takes time, layer by layer.
Well, that's why ultimately in first sessions you do play with kind of an a la carte play session, right?
More like you explore different things. You see how the person responds. How far you can go with certain things, what they like, so that then you can be like, okay, these things really worked. This is what we mostly liked. Let's go deeper into them. Yeah. But at first you kind of, you have like more like a buffet of different things that you would like to both try.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with, let's say in a session, somebody tells you they like X things, and then there's like huge resistance once you start poking at something? Like,
Oh yeah, that's happened. Especially because a lot of people are very fantasy driven, so they have all these like fantasies and dreams and ideas that in their minds it's expectations, and when it comes to reality, then it's like, oh, but wait, this hurts. Yeah, like, oh, I want to take your whip and just be like completely like in bondage and just take, but then you just spank them and they're like, oh, red. So it's like, we're gonna build it up, build your tolerance, your resistance. If you want to get there, you don't dive in, you kind of ramp up, but you want to ultimately introduce them to that fantasy without going straight into what exactly they want. Because most of the time, especially people who have no background of playing with anyone else, and they're like, oh, I've had this fantasy for so long, and now I finally get to explore it, and I want to do everything right now. Like, and it's like, you will not be able to, like, just like emotionally, psychologically, even less physically for certain things. So you do want to kind of poke, push, but that's why sometimes when they state their soft limits, you have like the hard limits and soft limits. And soft limits is where it's the most fun to play, because that's kind of like, it's not a no, but it's not a yes because I'm scared, I've never tried it, but it's where I'm like kind of curious about. It's where I'm like, ooh, that seems interesting, but I don't want to like just dive into it because it kind of feels so out of my comfort zone. So that's where you want to slowly kind of start poking, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, I've had clients have resistance. You want to just go slower. Yeah.
And I think
Pet the resistance.
Yeah.
Don't hit it.
I'm even more interested how that translates in personal sessions with people that you want to play with, people who are more comfortable saying no in the middle of a scene. Like, it's happened to me that someone says no, and I'm like, and I freeze for a second or 5. I'm like, okay, how do I do this? Where do I go? And I have to kind of breathe through it, because for me too, I'm here and all of a sudden, like, I fall kind of. I don't, like, how do you deal with that?
So
in the context
already
of play?
when you hear no hides something, no hides a fear. So if you can look what's behind that no, because if someone's just like no, that ultimately is not a rejection of you. It's more of there's something I can't do ultimately. And if you look into what it is, why that no, what's the resistance about, then you can uncover other things. So sometimes it will, and most of the time it has nothing to do with the person. They're not saying no to, they're already playing with you. They want to be with you. They want to share this experience. But if there's that thing, maybe they think of like, oh, that one time when I was in high school and someone slapped me and now you slapped me and it brings me back there. So no, don't do that again. So, and then you're like, wait, I really wanted to, like, that's fun. And you're like, yeah, but where does that come from? So that no is actually opening a conversation about the no, instead of seeing it as a wall. Okay, I hit the wall, now it all ends. It's like, no, actually it opens a door to like what's behind the no.
Play is therapy, almost.
I mean, it's a very intimate context where you experience very vulnerable parts of yourself with someone who guides you through them. So there's a lot of links between both.
Yeah.
You're in a secluded area that is reserved for that. It also depends on the intention. If your intention is to explore yourself, not just like get a quick release, or okay, I checked this thing, I tried pegging for the first time, okay, it's done. It's more like, oh, I want to explore myself. I want to see what comes up and not have an end goal in mind. I want to reach this thing and have that expectation, but leave it like an open-ended experience, then so much can come up.
It's very interesting. Makes you want to play, huh?
I mean, I always want to play. So yeah.
But there's a lot of like links between what happens in your intimacy and in the dungeon with everyday life that I bring into like my programs, into my workshops. I like to create that bridge between both worlds because I feel like BDSM is kind of a realm of itself in which you can explore parts of yourself that in everyday life influence you, impact you. So when you think, for example, of bondage, when you are in a BDSM context, you have rope around you, you are tied up, you're very conscious of your bondage. You're very conscious of what keeps you restrained. You're very aware of there is no escape and I'm stuck. But what is your bondage outside of the dungeon? What is your bondage in your everyday life? What is keeping you stuck and unable like to go where you want to go and be free? And it can be a relationship, you know, it can be anything. So sometimes through play, you come to realize things that have nothing to do with play.
Or through life, you realize the play that you want.
Also, yeah. Sometimes, I think it's directly linked.
Yeah.
And it's like how kids play. So, you know, like as kids, like, oh, I want to be the doctor or I want to be a puppy. Now it's just like adults playing in a more conscious way. So it can, like, I think we've kind of disconnected from that, our child parts, that playfulness. And now we're kind of giving ourselves permission to go there and to go further and to do it in a consensual and safe way. And from the outside, it seems so extreme. It's like, oh my God, BDSM, so intense and so hardcore. And like, whoa, that looks so dangerous and abusive. But if you think about it, because there's so much negotiation and communication and trust and safety, ultimately, that's why you can go as far, because you know that you are safe to do so. If you meet a guy in a bar and you don't have any discussion, nothing, and you just end up in the bedroom and he fucks you, that could be way more traumatic, how it ends, than having a hardcore whipping session with someone you had 3 hours of negotiation before and you build it up and you have a connection and then there's aftercare. And it looks from the outside so intense, but it's intense as much because you have trust to go that far, as opposed to vanilla relationships that have no ground, no safe ground. And it looks like, oh, it's just like missionary. But the fact that the woman is suffering and she doesn't like the guy and he's like just gonna jerk off inside of her and she's not gonna get any pleasure, that's fine. So it's like, for me, there's a lot of what people perceive versus what actually things are.
Yeah.
That's why I want to destigmatize BDSM.
Yeah. We get a lot of clients through like our introduction workshop, and sometimes the people who we touch the most are those who didn't have these realizations. So it's like couples who come and they like stay after class and they're like, we've been doing things wrong for so long, and just the things that you talked about, like we have so much work to do now. That we know that we had to do this work in the first place. And
Totally.
Yeah, I think in the vanilla world there's these scripts that people take for granted, and it's a path that's already well trodden and we don't even need to talk about it, and they don't realize that actually like everything should be talked about. Just because we had sex missionary doesn't mean that there's nothing to say about it.
And you say the path that has been traced, and the thing is that this path has been traced by people that are not you, for you to go to a place you don't really want to go to. So by questioning this, you question everything. That's why people in the kink world also are, there's a lot of people that question their identity to begin with, because the moment you question your gender, your sexuality, you already get out of the normative. And then you get to question all other things, because if that thing is not what you were told and taught or conditioned to believe, then what else is to question? And then it opens like this rabbit hole of like, oh, I want to explore that thing and this thing, and whoa, there's so much. But when you correspond to what you were brought to, like when you correspond to the ideal, so when you're like a white cis straight person, so you already correspond to what you were told is like a normative and right. You don't need to question these things, especially if you're vanilla as well and you like regular sex and everything else scares you. You already are kind of like, oh, but this works for me and everything is exactly as I was told. So then you don't question anything. And then in your everyday life, everything else doesn't need to be questioned either. It kind of is all connected. But when you question one thing, it makes you question everything. But if you do correspond to that, when you are just already, when you're straight and cis and you are vanilla, like if sex as you were taught is the sex you do have and you enjoy it,
or taught.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, that's fine with me. Like, I'm not curious to see more. And there are people like that, and that's fine. But it just kind of doesn't allow you to even explore, like even outside of sexuality, just explore other realms of things that you could like. And you're kind of in a box. In a box that's like, oh, it's comfortable, that box. I like that box. I'm safe in that box. Why would I look outside of that box for other things?
I'll just work my 9 to 5 and watch TV at night and go walk my dog and that's my comfortable little life.
Yeah. And some people are
like
okay with that, but I think you should choose it, not that it should choose you.
That's a really big point. I think a lot of people just fall into this default of, we're being told, like, the relationship escalator. This is what a relationship looks like. This is what life looks like. You go to school, you get your higher education, you get your perfect little job, and you buy a house, and you start a family. And I think our generation and like the younger generation, like really putting it more and more into question because, well, the same things that were available to the boomers are no longer available to us. Society doesn't look the same. Economy doesn't look the same. And more and more people are choosing polyamory. More and more people are choosing to ask those questions and engage and play.
Yeah, I think there's more than there's ever been because people are kind of starving for freedom and everything that is close to normativity feels like restrictive at this point because it's been so forced. But if you, like, I had a friend, she was polyamorous and she, like, everything she was doing was non-normative. She was a sex worker. And at some point, because she tried all these things and she was so free, she eventually was like, okay, now that I was in both sides, both extremes, where's my balance? And now she chose a life that is more normative by choice because she tried both. And I think that's great. But if you fall into it unconsciously and then you're like, oh, I'm so unhappy, I'm not sure what's wrong. It's like, have you ever tried something alternative? And I'm not going to use alternative because that scares people, but have you ever tried something different? So just to see how you are and like to see yourself from a different perspective.
Yeah, stepping out of your comfort zone, even like tiny little steps.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just moving away from where you were brought up, your city, your country,
or
where no one knows you.
Saying yes to something that normally you would
say no. Yeah.
And then maybe discover that, finally, no, I don't like that. It was right to say no. Or, oh, wait, this is surprising.
Yeah, trying different things, exactly.
So do we have any questions? No? Good.
Malissia is very good at explaining things. What kind of a person... Is there one kind of person? What kind of people end up coming to you for these workshops? Is there a common denominator?
Well, there is a common denominator. It is not necessarily what I aim to always attract, but it's definitely women who are interested in being professional doms. So who want to learn, because that's like my starting point. That's my, I guess, background in terms of work and career and where I've proven myself. So that's what most people are attracted to. Oh, I like her lifestyle. I like how she speaks and perceives BDSM. I'm for the first time interested in this world, and I never was. So it's either people who are looking to get into the sex work industry and work as pro doms, or just women that are already in positions of power and in positions of like they have a job, they have the life they want, and they want to be more assertive and have more confidence and kind of be, yeah, use the knowledge and skills to apply them in everyday life. So even in their relationships. And I've had women that are lawyers and women who are like CEOs of companies, and they just are like, yeah, I am this, but it's not because like on paper I'm like this lawyer or this CEO, that in person when I'm with my team and with these people that I feel like I'm that bitch. And I want to feel like I'm that bitch, you know, like boss lady. So they will be seeking like to learn more and to understand also why they have reached that level of competence and still have no confidence. Mm-hmm.
Do you have people that come to you that are going into it for the wrong reasons?
No.
You haven't perceived that?
No, I haven't had you mean like pro doms?
Sure.
To be, or just because for me, if they're interested in doing personal development, female empowerment, there can't be really a bad reason for that. I do see women that come and want to be in the sex work industry as pro doms, and I sense that they're not willing to actually do the work to be there. They kind of just are like, how do you do a session? How do you attract clients? So more like the result of all the work than doing the work. So that I think it's more like, wait, first things first, you know, we can go deeper into that after, but first let's see where you're at right now. And this is where you want to go. But now you're looking only at how you want to attract clients, but you don't even know what's your niche, what you specialize in, what you like, how to ask for what you like. So how are you going to attract someone who matches this if you don't even know what this is? So
it's more about that. I meant like, you know, people who display red flags that you have to dismantle. Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's more they're not aware, not necessarily for the wrong reasons, but that they're not aware of all that's underneath it. They kind of see just the result. I want to be like this, but they don't necessarily understand all the layers underneath. So yeah, not coming from with bad reasons, unless it's like just, oh, I want to make a ton of money. Then it's more like, once again, that's like the result of something, not the means to get there. But no, it's sometimes I think there's just there are people that I see, I don't want to say have ignorance, but they just are not aware of a lot of things, and they're going to ask things like questions that for me are trivial, because even if I teach them this, they will still not be able to do it because they can't even say no, for example. So if you can't even say no to your client when your client's like, oh, I really want a golden shower now, and she's like, okay, well, it's my client and he paid, so I'll just do it. So is that really making you feel dominant in your power, or you're at the service of this self-serving sub? So even if I teach you how to do a good golden shower, it has to come from you who wants to do it, and not because your client's like, well, I want that because I asked for it. So there's like, yeah, for me, it's more like you have to come from a place of empowerment when you do this work. Otherwise, in this industry, you will feel very disempowered in it.
I'll say, like, my experience in your workshop, the women that were there, most of us were not aiming to be pro doms. We were there for personal reasons, and I really saw some people truly bloom through the 8 weeks. I won't name any names, but I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, like, that program, I wish more women who are not aiming to be pro doms would look into the work that you do, because it's really powerful, and there's so much truth to it that has nothing to do with even interacting with men or making money or anything. It's just like how to inhabit your own reality and your body and existing in the world, in this world, as entirely yourself.
Yeah, to begin with, that it was my intention, and I think it switched when I started myself questioning, okay, how do I do, because I was doing this trial with the group you were in. So it was for me, okay, it works, now what? Okay, now am I a coach? Am I, like, what am I? So it's even for me, like, questioning how I market myself. So I did switch my bio, and I wrote my real name, and I said I'm a coach. And that's when everything kind of shifted, not how I expected, because women were like, oh, wait, because I didn't want to be put on a pedestal by women and be like, oh, this mistress that is unapproachable, and that creates like this distance between us. I wanted to be approachable and to be connected with them. And already when you're a professional dominatrix, you're already put on a sort of pedestal and like on a throne. So I didn't want that. But then when I put my real name and I put coach, everyone was like, oh, wait, but I want the mistress, I want to learn from the mistress. So it actually backfired because I had like a long wait list for the second round. And then most girls were like, do you have a wait list for a program about female domination? So most of them were interested more in that. And I think it's because I changed my like information. And ultimately it makes sense now to me because I come from a selling point of I'm a pro dom and I'm known as Mistress Malissia. So no one knows like me and that I'm a coach. Like I've never been a coach. So it kind of confused people, I think. And they wanted to learn about female domination. So for me, it's more like, yeah, I'm going to teach you female domination, but just through a way that is going to be way deeper than what you expect. I'm not going to just go through like, okay, this is dungeon equipment. This is how you speak to, how you negotiate a scene. Like for me, it's like we can go into that if they want. That's why now I want to offer them like one-on-one coaching, like for an hour after we've done the program, if they want to dive deeper into more like working in that field. But otherwise, for me, it's such deep work that I will advertise it in a way that, yes, we do female domination. Ultimately, that's what it is. And you can use it in the dungeon, you can use it in the bedroom, you can use it in the courtroom, you can use it anywhere. Because ultimately, it's you who has stepped in her power. So that power then translates into everything.
How do you approach like so you're doing it from a woman's perspective for women. Do you allow those who don't identify that way, but who are still affected by patriarchy and like have all that influence as well?
Yeah, so for me, it's I've had non-binary people in my group this round, and I serve the feminine. Yeah. So that's like my mission now. So if the person identifies or wants to either identifies as woman, female, was raised as female, or trans, is a trans woman and transitioned into being a woman. It's just that certain people will have a struggle that I am not trained to help with because I have not experienced it myself. So if I have a trans woman in the group and I teach this, she will need way more from me as a mentor to help her navigate her situation, which I have not experienced.
You can't get.
So I feel like it would maybe not be my target audience, right, because her experience has a layer that is very important to put forward and highlight. Yeah. But at the same time, am I equipped for that? And if I was a trans woman, yes, because I would have had that experience, that path, been on that path, on that journey, but I'm not. So I can't speak from that point of view. So with this program specifically, I think that, yes, trans women can get a lot from it, like any woman can get a lot from it. It's female empowerment. But there would be also layers that I can't address.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. It's come up before, so I thought it was fair.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's a very good answer.
Mm-hmm.
Just a moment. Do we have a question, or is that just the time flag? Good.
Remove your leg.
So,
I'd just say, like, from my experience, just to add on to what you've said, like, even though you're speaking to women and it's catered for women, I think everybody has something to learn from these concepts that you teach. And I would really wish more men would want to tune in and listen and learn about it and partly understand like our reality as women, but also understand like their role in it and also how patriarchy affects them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like I work with men so much already when they're on their submission, and when I have regular subs or personal subs, we go actually really deep into personal development just in parallel. I make them read books. I control their diet. Like there's so many layers of how I impact their everyday life. So I do work with men. It's just like separately.
Yeah.
And I like having that container that is only for women, because just women being all together is already healing the sister wound.
Yes.
So already being witnessed in a vulnerable state and encouraging each other, celebrating each other, I think is part of the journey of female empowerment. Yeah.
I really loved that part. We did it every week. We would get together, and our first like interaction was, "What are we celebrating this week?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an amazing practice that I haven't done as much recently, but now that I think of it, I'm like, yes, need to bring this back. Celebrating your
every win,
victories.
Yeah, every victory, and anytime you were able to apply something you've learned, because at first you're like, oh yeah, I had to do this thing, I didn't do it. Oh, I should have said this and I didn't say it. At first you kind of notice yourself not doing it until at some point you just do it, and then you have to celebrate yourself and be like, yes, I did it, to really highlight it as a change of behavior, change of habit.
Yes, rather than constantly highlight, oh, but I failed here. Oh, but I failed here.
Yeah,
and
or beating
like
yourself up for, oh, I didn't do
and...
it again. Then you become another judge of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
We're definitely going to have you back, because I think there's a whole lot to talk about. Or we'll have some other discussions, maybe for some workshops around there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the next one is in fall, next Divine Dawn Awakening program.
Tell the audience how to find you, how to contact you.
Yes. So my main platform I use for this work is Instagram. Mistress.mindset is my handle, and I have a website as well, but I will usually post on Mistress Mindset regarding any workshops or events, because I also host big events that are called Babeland. So also for women and non-binary people to party, but we also do shibari. There's also a buffet, DJ, performances. It's really fun. And it also creates a safe space where in practice people are together and in their feminine energy, feminine power. We wear lingerie. It's a celebration of the feminine. So that these events have been really successful so far, and so big that I even need a bigger space now to host them.
So is this a safe space? Are people vetted, or is this a safer space?
Is it a safe space that what?
Is it a safe space or a safer space? Like, is everybody vetted? Or...
Yes, everyone's vetted. There's an application form to come.
There we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in.